Hello, and welcome back to the Rook's Nest. Alex here, and in today's tutorial, we're going to be creating this particle animation using only native Cinema 4D particles and field forces. Then we'll be going over how to render them using Redshift. So without any further ado, let's get started. So here we are inside Cinema. First things first, let me just go through this scene I've got set up already. If you're not interested in that and only really want to see how the particles are made, just skip forward to around the 620 mark and go from there. So I've got this box here which I just modelled quickly. So it says box anim, and it just spins around towards the end here, rotates. As you can see, it slightly expands, it spins through its weight. That's done via the use of a jiggle deformer. As you can see, that's not active right now. That's because I've baked out this cube into this alembic here. So that's the animation you're seeing in the viewport. If I scrub through, it's just playing this alembic. And the reason I've done that is because when you activate motion blur within Redshift here, and you don't have enabled deformation blur enabled, it will ignore these mesh deformers like jiggle and delay. And that said, even sometimes when I have this enabled, it still doesn't work. So I'm not quite sure why that is. But the reason I haven't turned enabled deformation blur on is because when I was creating my tracer or my particle trails, it was also calculating them as deforming meshes. It was creating a strange blurring, which I didn't like. So the only way around that was to bake this cube animation down into an alembic. So that's why that's disabled. Now inside this box shining up, I have an area light, which is animated on bright 100%. And all the way down to 0, so it's off for a while and then comes on again. So if I hit play so you can see what it's doing, you see it's off there, comes on full whack, off there, full whack. So that's just the signal the particle's coming out. I just thought it added an extra bit to it. And the reason we can see it volumetrically is because I've got this Redshift environment here. So I've just default, everything's on default settings. I've lowered the phase to try and emphasize the beams a little bit, the streaks. And the way we get the light to show up in the volume, like so, is on our light object. So if we come to this area light, and we come to volume, I've given it some ray contribution scale. So if this is down to 0, it won't do anything. So you need to give it a value of this, say, which I had 1.5, so let's put it back to 1.5, like so. Okay, I've also got this basic ground plane, nothing special there, just a plane object scaled up. Got these dust particles, which is a cloner with the positions randomized, and I'm driving each axis of deformation, so movement on the Z, Y, and X using a shader. And the reason I'm doing that is because you can't perfectly, well, as far as I know, you can't perfectly loop the random effector. So I just got around that by using 3 different shaders with a noise animated with a animations. Change that back. I've just increased the global scale and added some animation speed and then a loop period. So since I'm rendering this at 30 frames a second, the loop period of 5, it's 150 frames. Also, when you're doing this animation speed and loop period, if you multiply the loop period and animation speed, they always have to equal 1 or above. You can't have a loop period that's 0.5. It has to be 1. So if your animation speed is 1, you can have loop period at 1 and it will loop perfectly every second. At 0.2, that's the slowest speed it will go with a loop period of 5. I found that by the hard way, wondering why my animations or noises weren't looping. And this shader node here, so I've done 3 different shaders on each axis, because if you do them together with the same shader, you'll find that they just move from one point to another. Because this isn't a 3D noise, it's sort of a 2D noise, and it applies across the whole image. It's not the same as the random noise. So that's why I had to make it 3D by using 3 of them. Then all we've got is this dome light, which is just sort of giving a bit of overall illumination to the scene. And I've just put in it a HDRI I got from HDR Haven. In fact, it's one I've used in a previous tutorial. I just threw this in to give it a bit more, just to give it a bit more light. Its exposure's down quite low because I didn't want it too bright. Like I didn't want it brightening up the whole scene, even though that doesn't look too bad. I kind of wanted it to be a bit more ominous, so I just lowered it down slightly. And that's the only value I changed in that. And then I've got a physical sun. which is pointing opposite towards the camera. So if I come out of this view here and we see the camera's going this way, and if we take a look at our physical sun, if I just move it up, you can see it's pointing at like sort of 45 degrees towards the ground, towards the facing the camera. And that's what's giving us this sort of reflection at the back here, this specular illumination on the floor. I've increased the sun scale a bit just to blur the shadows out, and I've reduced the intensity down a load. The other thing I've changed is on Ray, I've reduced its glossy, because if it's at full, it's picking up way too much, or showing up in way too much reflections for my liking. It was sort of washing out this area where the particles were going to be, and you couldn't really see the volumetric light too well. So I just reduced that value down something quite low. And then to back that up, in the floor surface, it was still too strong. So in my material on the floor, take a look at it, I also reduced the reflection in that to something really low as well. So that's on 0.016. Because if this is up, you see it's crazy if it's nearly full. So 0.016 was my sweet spot for that one. Okay, so that's my basic scene setup. I'm sorry if I went into a bit too much detail there. That lasted way longer than I was hoping it would. Now let's just focus on creating these particles. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come to simulate, and let's create a emitter. We're going to rotate this 90 degrees. Now if we press play, let's just pause this so our viewport runs faster. You can see these particles just flying straight up in the air. Great. Let's reduce the scale. So I'm going to do this by typing these numbers in. So if I come to our emitter, I'm going to reduce the size of our emitter to 40 by 40 centimeters. Let's come to our... Oh, this is still... Seems like it's still reacting to me. Anyway, let's go back to our front view here. I'm going to grab this emitter and we're going to move it down just to the base of the box. There we go. So now in here, if we come out of this view, we can see we've got a emitter at the bottom of our box. If I press play, we get these particles shooting out. Let's animate these emitter settings a bit more so we're getting more particles and it's sort of closer to the thing we want initially. So if we come to our emitter, let's go to particle, and let's change our birth rate. So let's start out, we're going to keyframe this. So I'm going to start it out at, say, 500 and 500. So our renderer and birth rate and editor and renderer are the same. And I'm going to hit a keyframe on that. And I'm going to go 25 frames forward. Oh, there we go. You can see we've got more particles spawning. And I want that to increase to 1,000 over those frames. And then let's say after 75 frames, I want to have stopped emitting completely. So we should get particles increase and then decrease. And then it should start again. Particles increase and slowly decrease in numbers. Nice. Now they're going a bit too fast as well, so I'm going to drop the speed down to 100. And let's press play again. And you see they go. If we're on our camera, it's sort of all gone by 125 out the frame. Now the next thing we're going to do, we need to add the trails of these particles. So that's crazy. So that's quite simple. With the emitter selected, we can come to MoGraph and add a tracer object. Now, because we had the emitter selected, it's automatically added that into our tracer object under the tracer link. So if we press play now, if we go back to the start, press play, we should see every single one of our particles is drawing our path, our line. It's not quite doing what we want yet. So we want it to stop. We don't want it to be trailing forever. You know, I want them to be a certain length. I want them to trail off. So if we come to our limit on our tracer object down here, and we change it to from end, and we'll say 10 frames from end, and press play. There we go. You see we've now got shorter trails. We're starting to get there. So now the next thing we want to do is we want to affect these particles. We want them to move around. And the way we're going to do that is with our emitter selected, we're going to come up to simulate forces, and we're going to add a field force. Now, initially, if we press play, you'll see something strange happens. Absolutely nothing. And that at the moment is because, first of all, there's two reasons for this. One is we're adding to velocity and the strength is 5. But we're going to be changing this to set absolute velocity because we want them at a constant speed following this field. And I'm going to set it at, 150. Now if we press play, you see they're not even appearing. And that's because they're actually just sort of frozen solid as we come out of this camera as they're spawned in this box. And the reason they're frozen solid is because we've set the absolute velocity to strength 0, to strength 150, but our entire field is telling it that nothing is going on, so it's not moving. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add a solid to this field force, add a solid, and we're just going to make sure that we're affecting the Y value by 1. So now what's going to happen is if we press play, they're all going to start getting this constant speed of 150 moving in the Y axis. So now they're all shooting up. Great. You see? Perfect. Now let's add that field, the thing that's going to make them converge and disperse. So once again, in our field force, we're going to hold down and click and hold on linear field and choose random field. And as you can see here, this is our field being visualized in the viewport. It's a bit crazy at the moment. So with my field force object selected, I'm going to come to display and just increase the line density, but untick this display vector length and just keep it as this. So we can see the direction of the field, but not necessarily the strength of it. Okay, we go back to our object. Now let's check our random field out. Let's see what happens if we press play with just default. So we're going to press play with just the default. As you can see, we're nearly there. Not looking too bad already. But I had a few things. So I just changed the scale to 200. So it wasn't so large. So it was a bit larger. So it wasn't so erratic. And I also didn't want it starting so soon. If you can see, I didn't want it intersecting the box here. So the way we get around that problem is we come to our field force object, select fall off. Let's create a linear field, like so. And we want this linear field fall off to be on the Y. I think it's either Y plus or Y minus, but we should be able to see. Let's come out of our camera. So basically, I don't want this field to start until it's sort of out the top of the box. So we'll pop that there. Let's see what happens. It's either going to... There we go. So as it comes out, this area below, the field force is not going to do anything. And then as soon as it transitions into this edge of outside the box, it's going to get grabbed into the field and create this pattern. Great. So let's come to our camera. Let's hide all this. We don't want to have a look at it. I don't want to see this linear field or random field in the viewport. Just click out of it if you're still seeing it. Let's just take a look at our animation. I'm not a big fan of these tracer lines. They're a bit sharp. You see how they got sharp edges? So let's go into our tracer. Let's change our intermediate points to natural. We'll leave that at 8. It's still sharp. So instead of linear, I'm going to change this to B-spline. And as you can see, that's just smoothed out these splines. So if we press play now, let's have a look. We've got these nice smooth splines. Now, if you don't like this pattern or you want to try something different, there's plenty of things you can do. Like just change the random field, maybe set up the field force so that it's, instead of set absolute velocity, you could change it to add to velocity. And as long as you've got a friction force in, so if we press play now with this add, you'll see it goes, woo, and it accelerates because it's just constantly adding this value. But if we go to friction and we just slow it down maybe by 100 each time, it's going to be pretty slow out of the gate. But once it gets into, in fact, this, we can speed it up quickly by giving it maybe 500 to start with. As you can see, as it goes through, you're getting quite these nice as it's sort of being picked up at the bottom there. It's quite interesting. But yeah, you can play around with stuff like that. But for now, just to keep it simple, I'm going to leave it at 100 speed at the start, get rid of this friction force, and we'll just make it a set absolute velocity. So press play. Lovely. So now we need to deal with rendering this stuff. So if we hit render, you'll notice that nothing appears. You know, there's nothing telling this to come into Redshift. And the way we do that is really simple. So we just first let's do our particles. Let's grab our emitter here, right click on it, come to Redshift tags and give it a Redshift object tag. And this tag now knows that this is a particle system. And it gives you this tab here when you've got the object selected called particles. At the moment they're disabled. But we can say, oh no, we want them to be sphere instances. And this will create a bunch of spheres dynamically within Redshift, perfect spheres. We can then adjust their scale, and I might say, you know what, I don't want them that large, I want them 0.4, I want them a bit smaller. And then we can go, oh, and I want these to have a material. So I've just created these incandescent materials of different colors, incandescent colors. The way they create these is just, once again, we can come here, create materials, Redshift material, and just choose incandescent. And here, and we can just change go into illumination, just change the incandescent color or the illumination color. And I've made 3 variants. So I'm just going to delete that because we don't need it. I've already made them. But let's say I'll take this first one and we just put it straight onto our emitter. There we have it. These nice glowing particles. They're glowing quite a lot at the moment. That's because on my camera tag, I have this bloom enabled. It's probably better to do this in your compositing software, but just for the purpose of this, it's nice to have it in the viewport so you can see what this effect would do. That's now in Redshift, applying tiny spheres to each particle. Now what about the trails? So it's almost exactly the same process. We grab our tracer, let's right click on it, come to Redshift tags, another object tag, and because it knows this is splines, it gives us this curve option. At the moment the curve is disabled. But I'm going to say I want these to be capsules. And look at that. We've now got these capsules. And the reason I do capsules over cylinders is because they give you these rounded ends, which you can't really see there, but I prefer it to capsules rather than cylinders. We've got our thickness set to 1. But also what I want, I kind of don't want them the same thickness all across. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this scale here, and towards the end, I'm going to drop it down like so. And it's going to give us this tail off. So if I come, oh, let's pause this and play it through to a part of the animation that is towards the end so we can have a look. There we go. That might be fine. Hit play. Now this is supposed to be making them thin at the bottom, but it doesn't look like it's doing the opposite. So maybe something to do with the direction. So I'm just going to grab this and bring this one up. There we go. Now we've got our tails. See, towards the end, they're nice and pointy. Start thick at the top, trail off at the end. They're still slightly thick, so I'm going to make them the same as our thing, or maybe a bit, just do 0.4 for now. Now, in the same manner, we can apply a material to these. Now, I've created this material I've called Tracer, which is super simple. It's literally a material called tinted glass that I've chosen and just changed the color of it to like this blue. That's really basic all it is, and I've just maybe given it some roughness. It's not perfectly transparent, and all we need to do is grab that and apply it to our tracer. And there we go. Now we've got these glass trails. So if we come back to the start, press play, let's have a look as it plays through. Let's pause this so it updates faster. Get a good spot like there. Press play. Here we go. So now we've got our refractive trails. Now there's one more thing we can do to make this slightly more interesting. And if you've noticed, I've got 3 different incandescent materials here. Now I don't want these all to be exactly the same color, these dots. I want them to be varying slightly. So instead of using in our emitter, and we come to our object tag, instead of using sphere instances, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sphere. This version will do fine for now. I'm going to make its radius 1. So it's tiny, you can't even see it. And I'm going to give it this incandescent material. I'm going to control drag down, create another one and another one. And I'm going to just give these their individual, that one's that one, and this one, this one. So now we've got 3 little incandescent spheres, 1 centimeter in size. And what we can do is we can come to our emitter object, and just like in MoGraph, when you apply objects, so if we go custom objects, I can drag these 3 in here. Ooh. I can drag these 3 into our window here. And what it will do, it will iterate through these depending on what distribution you choose. And I've chosen sequential, so it's going to go 1, 2, 3, and in order. And because they're all sort of random anyway, it doesn't really matter. But as you can see now, we've got this nice variation in our particles. So there we go, it's as simple as that. But yeah, have a play around. There's certain things we can do as well. We can, if we pause this, like maybe you're not a big fan of the way this noise is moving these particles. So we come to here, let's go to our random field and let's pick a different noise. So let's say we're going to do, let's try this semi noise and let's press play, see what happens. You can see you getting these sort of jagged line, like almost like these sudden changes in direction. So if let's increase the scale up quite large because it's a bit too fine, press play. You can see we're getting these large sweeps. So maybe that's too much. We can go to 1000. There we go. And we got more like this networky sort of movement. This might be good if you had less particles so you could see more of the individual lines. I mean, there's plenty of noise here. You can have a play around through all of them. Some of them will do things different to the others. Some of them won't. Like, some of them will be very similar. But in fact, just by increasing the field size to 1000 and say, let's go back to our Perlin noise, you'll see now it created a far more flocking as opposed to before there were smaller branches. So we can scale this up and create some larger flocks of particles as the noise is larger. You see, so it's swirling around a bit more. So have a play around, see what you can come up with. Yeah, but that's it. Well, thanks again for watching. Hope you found some of the stuff in here useful. If you liked the video, please subscribe if you haven't already. Give it the thumbs up. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment. I will get back to you. The project files for the scene are available on our Patreon. The link for that is in the description below, so please check that out. Once again, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for watching. Bye!